Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
If you're a dentist in private practice and you had to pick a path to ensure maximum prosperity and success over the next 5, 10, 20 years, depending on how long you're going to practice, what would that be? Well, to that end, we just finished the MGE Owners Conference. This is an annual meeting we have for all of our alumni. It's the biggest meeting we do of the year. And at the beginning of that meeting, I launched the meeting on Wednesday morning with sort of a briefing for all of our clients as to what's happening in the industry, how that relates to what's happening economically, and the path that we see as a company would be best to take going forward to ensure your success. So what I wanted to do for this week's episode, it was a long presentation I just did. I can't fit that into a podcast, but I want to cover some of the bigger points. And this is the exact same thing we're telling MGE clients as to which path or which actions you should be taking to ensure maximum success in the years to come. And I'm going to break this episode down into 4 parts. I probably won't fit within our 30 minutes or less concept. I very rarely do. I probably should dump that from the intro. But it breaks down into 4 basic parts. The first thing I'm going to do is go over what's happening in dentistry, because it's not just, people are going to the dentist, we're doing crowns, bridges, implants, or whatever, or veneers. There's bigger industry trends at play that you may or may not be aware of. It's the first thing I'm going to cover. Then I want to take a look at what opportunities these trends are creating for privately practicing dentists, which is you. These are opportunities you could be taking advantage of right now, and it's definitely opportunities our clients are taking advantage of. From there, I want to take a look at what the challenges are. What challenges are you going to run into economically, from a labor market perspective, and otherwise that could make it difficult to take advantage of these opportunities. And I'll end off with a specific, it's like 4 or 5 steps, big picture action steps you should take going forward to ensure that you secure your long-term prosperity. Because you're literally, I think the best way to say it is you're looking at it from a professional perspective. There are once-in-a-lifetime opportunities happening right now in the dental profession that very few people are aware of, and you should be taking advantage of, especially if you're an entrepreneurial type of dentist. So let's start off with the beginning. What's happening in dentistry? Well, I want to focus specifically on the supply of the number of dentists in the United States. And by the way, I've included a few slides from my presentation as a download that you can find on the episode webpage, and I'll give you the slide number. I don't have all the slides I had. It was like a 94 slide show, but I got 20 slides. And I'll tell you the slide number, slide number 1, slide number 2, and so on. And you can download it by clicking the link on the episode webpage. So the first thing I want to talk about is the number of practicing dentists in the United States. And that's slide number 1 if you want to use the slides. For the first time that I can find, based on the ADA statistics going back to the year 2002, we actually had a decline in the number of practicing dentists in the U.S. in 2023. It's the first time I've ever seen this. I'm sure it's happened at some point in the past before, but not since 2002. Last year, the number of practicing dentists went down by 257 doctors. May not seem like a lot, but it's the first time it ever went down. The next thing I'll bring your attention to has to do with general demographics. Now, I've got a slide for this. This is slide number 2. But again, if you can't look at the slides you're driving, I'll give you some basic information so you can think with this. This is a slide of the demographics within the industry. And the specific demographic we're focusing on here is age brackets. So if you look at this, it's a pie graph. And there's one specific point that I want to bring up. So of these 203,000 practicing dentists in the year 2023, and most, if not all of these statistics, by the way, are from the American Dental Association Health Policy Institute. And I have the info at the bottom of each slide. But based on the number of practicing dentists in the year 2023, these 203,315, 34.7% of them are 55 and over. About 70,000 doctors out of the 203,000 are over 55. Which brings us to this next data from the ADA, which is the average retirement age for U.S. dentists. And the most recent metrics we have on this are from the year 2021. The average dentist in the United States retires at an average age of 67.9, let's say 68 years of age. So at 68, the average dentist is going to retire. Which brings us to this next concept, and I hope you're tracking with this. I can't stress how important this information is from a business perspective, folks. There's something called the outflow or exit rate in a 5-year window. So if you see the picture I'm painting, we have over 200,000 dentists. Almost 35% of them are 55 and over, and the average retirement age is 67.9. Let's say 68 for argument's sake. We then have the outflow exit rate over a 5-year period. So for doctors under the age of 54, that outflow or exit rate is between 2.8 and 4.1%, meaning if I had 100 doctors standing in front of me and they were all under the age of 54, 5 years later, about 96 of them would still be practicing as dentists. Okay? 4% would have either moved on, retired, etc. Okay. Now, you move into the 55 to 64-year-old age bracket. All right? If I have 100 doctors standing in front of me who are 55 to 64 years of age, 5 years from now, 20 of them would no longer be practicing dentistry. So out of 100 doctors, 5 years later, only 80 would be left. Now, let's say we go 65 years and over. If I have 100 doctors standing in front of me, 100 dentists, and they're 65 years of age or over, 5 years from now, only 45 of them would still be practicing because the outflow rate over a 5-year period for the age bracket of 65 and over is 54.5%. Do you see where this starts to gain some importance now? You have more than a third of the profession. And these are the things that, we were looking at this stuff back in 2008, 9, 10, both Dr. Wintereg, one of the founders of the company, and I, we were looking at the age distribution amongst practicing dental professionals. This was the direction it was going. Now, I'm going to get into this in a second. You might think, well, there's all these kids in dental school. They'll just replace the ranks of dentists like they always have. That's true to a degree. We'll get into that in a second. But do you see where this is going? 55 and over, the exit rate over a 5-year period dramatically increases, okay? All right, so now you might think, as I just said, well, you have all these young people that are going to be coming in to fill all the ranks. Well, let's take a look at something. I have a slide for you to look at. It's slide number 4. And it specifically has to do with the number of students enrolled in CODA approved dental schools, okay, accredited dental schools. So the total U.S. dental school enrollment for the year 2022 through 2023, this is all 4 years in all CODA approved U.S. dental schools, is 26,596 students. That's all 4 years. Now, that is up from the prior year by 1.4%. That's up by 368 students. So the net number of students we added to the 4 years of dental school between 2021, 2 and 2-3 was 368 people. Do you see how this is we're talking about infinitesimally small percentages. Now it's going up, but it's not enough to make a severe impact. How does that compare with first-year enrollments in dental school? Well, first-year enrollments from 2021 and 2022 were 6,360. First-year enrollments in 2022 and 2023 were 6,513. It's up by 153 students. So it's not like dental school enrollment is on fire right now and we're seeing huge amounts of students entering dental school. It's going up, but it's not going up at a, mad clip. There could be any number of reasons for this. I'm not going to sit here and say that I know. I do know that dental school has become exorbitantly expensive compared to, say, 20 years ago. I think I mentioned this in an episode a year or so ago. I think it was the class of 24, 25 at NYU just for dental school, if you included student loans and interest on loans, was going to look at paying over $700,000. Tufts was around $550,000. This is not for undergrad. This is just dental school. And I think IU came in at the lowest for in-state tuition at around $350,000. So you've got some kid who's leaving dental school and they're already walking out with $500,000 in debt. And hey, you want to buy this practice? And like, I don't know. And freak them out a little bit, right? That's quite a mountain to climb when you're walking out, especially now that with student loans, it's some of the only type of debt you can't actually bankrupt yourself out of anymore. So I want to then bring your attention to the next, and I'm going to explain this, but this has to do with a graphic representation. And the name of this slide, it's slide number 5. It says that dentistry has a supply problem. And this kind of leads back to what I said in the beginning of this episode. If you look, it's a graph of the net increase or decrease in the number of practicing dentists in the United States. And you'll notice that that graph goes up, 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 up till about the 2010s, the early 2010s. Since that time, it sort of looked like a toboggan ride except for 1 year. It's been going down to the point where in 2023, it was actually negative. We actually have less practicing dentists in 23 than we had in 22. You might go, well, what's the big deal? I mean, there is the concept of supply and demand. You know, the less you have of something, the more expensive or in demand that something becomes. So that's not necessarily bad for a dentist, right? But if you take a look at how this compares to overall population figures, which I have a slide for, it's slide number 6 if you want to look at it, but I'll just kind of give you the highlights if you're listening to this. Population from 2022 to 2023 in the United States went up by 2%. It went up by 6.7 million people. We went from a little over 333 million to 339, almost 340 million people in a year. That's a 2% increase, whereas the number of practicing dentists went down by 252. It was a decrease. And then if you look at the projected population growth from there, it increases up to the point where in 2030, we're expecting to have almost 360 million people living in the U.S., which brings us to a point, and I'm not trying to disagree with the ADA or whatever, but the ADA thought that the number of the dentist to population ratio is going to stay relatively static through the mid 2020s, and then it will increase, meaning there'll be more and more dentists as compared to the population. And I'm just going to say, I don't know how we're predicting that. I don't really see it because I don't know where all these doctors are going to come from because, you know, the tuitions are cost prohibitive. You also you have to be somewhat academically gifted to get into dental school. It's not like this easy thing to get into. So it's not like we have and it's not like we have 50,000 slots for students to take. These 26,000, this is about the average that it's running. I don't know that the profession is going to grow quick enough to where we're going to see a meaningful impact on the number of dentists to population for probably at least the next 15 to 20 years, unless there's something I don't know about the number of new dental school enrollees. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So if you see the picture I'm painting, you have more than a third of the profession 55 and over. Technically, not all will retire, but that would put most of them on track or projected to retire over the next 13 years. You would then think that the ranks will be filled by all these younger dentists. It doesn't look like it's quite going to hit the mark. You may stay static, or you might see mild growth in the number of practicing dentists, which is what we're predicting rather. But then what's going to happen with all of these dental practices that these doctors 55 years and older own? Well, let's talk about practice ownership for a second. This is from the ADA. This is a quote from the ADA Health Policy Institute. It says, this is from 2021, practice ownership amongst dentists in private practice has been declining over the years, dropping from 84.7% in 2005 to 73% in 2021. So think with that a second. If you had 100 doctors in front of you in the year 2005, 85 of them would own a dental practice out of 100 dentists. If you did that same check in 2021, only 73 of them would own a dental practice. But where is this ownership being taken from? Is it the younger doctors or the older doctors? It's the younger doctors. Show you this next slide, and I'm going to talk about this. I say show you the slide. You can't really look at it if we're talking on audio here, but I want to kind of just point this up to you. You'll notice, if you look at this slide, it's slide number 7. And this has practice ownership dropping amongst younger doctors. You'll see in 2005, over a quarter of practicing dentists under the age of 30 owned their own practice. That number is now below 10%. And then doctors 30 to 34 in 2005, more than half own their own practice. That number is now down in the 30-something% range. So it's the younger doctors who are not owning practices now, whereas if you look in the upper ranges, 45 to 55, 55, 65, the ownership percentage has stayed somewhat static. That's where you see 80, 90% owning a practice. Where the practice ownership has been severely impacted over the last 20 years is in younger practicing doctors, which brings us to this next metric, which is practice ownership by age group. And this is a breakdown. If you take, for instance, the number of doctors practicing in that age bracket, to give you an idea, we have like doctors under 30 in the U.S. right now. We have 13,220. These are estimates, but they're pretty close. The number of doctors in that age bracket that actually own a dental practice is 1,256, because that number is under 10%. Let's compare that to doctors 55 to 64. We have 38,427 doctors who are 55 to 64. Well, of that, 622 own a dental practice. So the point being is the majority of practice ownership rests in doctors 45 years of age and older. So what does this all mean? Well, essentially what it means is younger doctors aren't picking up practices. All right. That's become something that's just become more of a trend or a fact over the last 20 years. But then we also have a large number of doctors that we project over the next 5 years, and heck, a lot more over the next 12, that will be exiting the profession in one fashion or another. So if we just take the 55 to 64 and 65 and over brackets, we estimate here at MGE that over the next 5 years between now and 2028, over 21,535 practices will be for sale. That's our estimate. That's slide number 11. If you want to look at it, we show you our math. So in the U.S., you'd have close to 21,500 dental practices for sale over the next 5 years. Now, are they going to sell? Who knows? Will DSOs pick them up? They will in certain cases. I did a whole thing on DSOs in the presentation. I'm not going to get too crazy on it here. I'll give you a couple factoids, but one factoid I'll give you is generally DSOs don't pick up practices that are doing less than $1.5 million a year because DSOs don't know how to scale. They're not going to buy a practice doing $300,000 a year and grow it to where it's doing $3 million. They don't have the tools for that. They're also not really set up from an investment model perspective to do that. There's too much risk involved in that. They're going to buy a practice doing $1.5 million to $2 million. They're going to pay a premium for it. They're going to add specialists, join a bunch of plans so that they can get the profit up. That's what they're going to do. So yes, some of these 21,500 offices that'll be for sale over the next 5 years that we're estimating will go to DSOs, but the majority won't. Some will get sold to individual practitioners and some will just close. But the point I'm making is there's a lot more practices available than potential buyers because these kids coming out of school over the next 4 years also most likely statistically, based on the current trends, aren't going to be buying them. So that right there is the opportunity. So just to sum it up, we have 3 basic points here. Number one, actually 4 really. Point number 1, which is the supply of dentists, despite the profession getting younger, the number of dental students are not increasing fast enough to keep up with population. So there's opportunity there. Point number 2, there's going to be, with 40% of practices in the U.S. owned by doctors 55 and over, the vast majority who would be projected to retire by 2036 within 12 years. We predict that at least 21,000 offices will be for sale over the next 5 years. And younger doctors, this is point number 3, who used to absorb this inventory when doctors were retiring, they would be the ones who would absorb it and buy these practices. Practice ownership is plummeting, especially in the 1 to 10 year practitioner. So this is no longer a strong trend. So there's your opportunity. That's the big opportunity. If these trends continue, we project that over the next 5 to 10 years, there are once in a lifetime expansion and buying opportunities for doctors that wish to take advantage. This to me, this is what I told our clients. This is as if you were walking around with a big, wad of cash in your bank account in the year 2011 looking to buy rental properties. There were tons of them on the market after the market had crashed in 2008 or 9. And if you had cash, you could buy them quick. The funny thing is, who you were competing against in 2011? You were competing against hedge funds, which in certain cases, if you're bidding against a DSO, you might be for certain practices, but I would not recommend that you do that. There's plenty of practices that DSOs have zero interest in that you could be buying. The only thing I would say is this, and this is why I briefed our clients on this, because MGE clients actually know how to scale a business. If this is a skill that you do not have, or you have trouble managing your business or scaling or growing your business, I would not recommend that you do this, because you're just going to basically be buying a headache. You're going to be buying a money pit at that point, because you're already having trouble with your current office. Don't go buying a second office because you hate office number one. You have to know how to scale. And what are the types of things we see clients doing? They'll have office number one and it's plugging along and doing well. They buy office number two. This is a satellite office. Office number two, they got for a song because it was only doing 30 or 40,000 a month. And a year later, office number two is now doing over 100,000 a month at a 20 to 25% net, making the owner doctor $250,000 a year. And they don't have to show up there. They have associates in it. The client who did that down here, they got an office down here in Florida. Their net's about 23, 24%. They bought an office that was doing about 50, 60 a month. The office is now doing close to 300 a month, and they don't really have to work there. They have associates in the practice. They just make sure clinical quality is high. That's the point I'm making. There are opportunities but you have to know what you're doing when you manage your business. So again, this is, I guess, my shameless plug of the episode. If you want to learn how to do these things, or you need help, or you'd like to know more about how we can help, you can ask for a free practice consultation. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage to find out more about MGE, because those are the types of things that we've taught our clients to do, and it definitely is important if you want to take advantage of these things. So, okay, you got all these practices that are going to be for sale, and younger doctors aren't picking them up. So what about DSOs? Let's go over a couple basic facts with relation to DSOs. I don't want to get into them too heavily, because really you're not competing against them, or at least what I told our clients, for what I'm talking about here. But here are some basic factoids. Currently, 13% of dentists in the U.S. are affiliated with a DSO. This is up from 10.4% in 2019. So in 2023, 13% are affiliated with a DSO. In 2019, it was 10.4%. Currently, doctors in practice 10 years or less, 23% of doctors in practice 10 years or less work for a DSO. So it's a considerable number. Almost a quarter of doctors who are practicing less than 10 years work for a DSO, which makes sense because, again, you got your student loans, you got to make payments. So this makes sense, right? And they can guarantee, an income. And in 2022, 35% of dental students, or dental seniors rather, who are looking at going to private practice, seniors in dental school, planned on joining a DSO. It's 35%, which is up from 12% in 2015 and 30% in 2020. It's definitely seen as a route out. A couple last points about DSOs. There's over 300 in the United States, and 27 out of the top 30 DSOs are private equity owned. Not to get into a huge thing on private equity. If you don't know what private equity is, the simplest way of explaining it is it's a fund. So let's say I have a private equity company and I want to buy another company. I would get a bunch of guys together or people together who would invest with me. Let's say a usually minimum investment is $25 million. And I put together a pile of money and I go buy a company with that pile of money. I'm going to hold that company for the next 5 to 7 years, try to suck out as much profit as I can because I have to pay back everybody who invested and then some. And then 5 to 7 years from now, used to be closer to 5, now it's closer to 7, I'm going to sell that company to somebody so I can get the rest of my money out. Okay. The idea obviously is we're not going to just break even on this. We're going to make a lot of money. That's how private equity works. Private equity's made a lot of inroads, over the last, 20 years in the U.S. for that matter. Right now, 30% of for-profit hospitals in the United States are owned by private equity. They've gotten into storage spaces, apartments, single family homes. They're now getting very heavy into healthcare. They did it with optometry. They've done it with, medical practices. They're getting very heavy into veterinary practices right now, like private equity bought PetSmart. And there's different private equity companies. And when I say private equity, a private equity company, and they've bought a lot of vet practices. The only thing I would say that's negative about it is generally the private equity model is not how do we improve patient care? It's how do we maximize profitability? And look, I don't want to just apply one brush to everybody. I'm sure there are private equity companies that go in and, I said this and I had a couple guys who'd been on Wall Street when I said this and they kind of laughed when I said it, but I'm sure there's private equity companies that go in with the intention of really taking great care of the customer and doing a good job. I don't really know a lot of people in private equity, but generally the whole purpose of private equity is make money. That's why you're there. Whereas one of my friends put it, get moolah. So It's not like they're going in. If you buy a dental practice, you might be going in, hey, let me do excellent patient care, and this is what I'm all about. And I'm going to hold this practice for as long as I can because it's my business. That isn't the private equity model. That's just not how it's built. And I don't want to get into it too much, but if you want to find out more about it, look it up online, private equity and healthcare, and see what you come up with. Google it and see what you come up with. But the reason I bring all this up, it leads me to a couple of opinions as far as how this is going to affect dentistry with DSOs and whatnot. I'll just give these to you. A few points. Number one, DSOs, as I said, don't target practices normally doing less than $1.5 million a year. So if you see a practice opportunity, there's some fella a couple towns over or lady a couple towns over, doctor who's been practicing for 30 some odd years and they want to retire, and their practice is doing $400,000 a year and they're going to sell it fairly cheaply. They're not going to be a private equity or a DSO target. They're just not. It's too small. That would be a private practitioner target. Those are the types of places we're looking for, something smaller that we can scale because DSOs can't scale. The problem is with DSOs and now with all that private equity money backing DSOs, it's messed up the whole valuation algorithm in dentistry. The valuation algorithm since I was in the industry, and I've been in the industry since the first Clinton administration, okay, in the early 90s. The dental office valuation algorithm was extraordinarily simple. It was basically 70% of last year's collections. That was it. That was how a practice was valued. So if your practice collected $1 million last year and you're selling it, you'd get $700,000. Now, there could be modifications to that, but they would be very minor. Let's say your equipment was really old. Well, then you might get 62 or 65%. Or let's say your equipment was really new. You only had the place for 5 years and for whatever reason you wanted to get out. You might get more, 73%. It wasn't a huge variance, right? I did see a little bit we got a little weird around the time of the real estate crash in 2008 or 9, especially in California. I saw some people paying 100% for practices. In Canada, you normally pay more for a practice than 70% you always have. It's just a different setup up there. And even now, where I see areas where there's a lot of incoming population pressure, where you have a lot of dentists moving to the state and very few practices for sale in those particular areas, I'm seeing higher percentages because you have more than a couple different doctors bidding on the practice. But generally, the 70% number was pretty safe, stable. It's what we all operated with for a long time. All right, well, enter DSOs backed by private equity money because there's a lot of money sloshing around now. So now you get these, it changes the whole algorithm. Now we're going to give you a multiple of EBITDA, which I'm not going to get into a whole thing on this, but what's EBITDA? It's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Okay. Interest payments, taxes due, depreciation, which you know about with your equipment. Amortization is like goodwill kind of is like depreciation over time. Anyway, bottom line, let's just say for argument's sake, it's like profit. Okay. So they'll give you a multiple of your EBITDA. So you might have a practice or profit, for lack of a better way of saying it. It's not exactly the same, but let's just say it is for argument's sake right now. So you have a $4 million practice that 20 years ago would have sold for 2.8, right? 70%. Well, that practice has a $1.2 million profit margin. So we're going to give you a 5x multiple on EBITDA. So you're selling it for $6 million. Do you see? That's a massive, massive shift. So when you start seeing more and more transactions like this, it starts to screw with the pricing model in the industry. And I've seen all kinds of goofy things, where people want to do these things they call roll-ups. Like, hey, let's get 20 of us together and say we're all the same practice because, DSOs pay more for multiple offices. They give you a higher multiple, on your EBITDA or your profit. Instead of 3x, they're going to give you 5x. So your profit's $1 million. Instead of giving you $3 million, they're going to give you $5 million. And those roll-ups don't really work. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to take a position on this. I've just talked to plenty of people in the industry. The DSOs have gotten wise to that, okay? They generally want to see a few things in place if they're going to give big money for something. But that being said, I believe personally, and look, I don't care what people think of me. This is one of the nice things about getting older. You just don't care, right? You care, but it's not like people can disagree with you, and that's fine. I believe currently DSOs are way overpaying for practices. As a matter of fact, I would go out and say we're looking at what I'd call a DSO bubble at this point, because they're overpaying for so many of these practices because they have access to all kinds of money through private equity. So you have these offices being bought for way more than they're worth. And then what's going to eventually happen? Let's take an example, because many of our clients have been DSO targets because their offices are big. And there's a couple problems. If you have a $7 million a year practice, there's very few private practitioners who could buy your practice, because who's going to be able to round up that much money for the bank, even at the 70% model? If you were doing $7 million a year, there's very few doctors who could go get a loan for $5 million to buy your office, number one. But number two, some DSO is going to want to offer you, $15 million, $20 million for that $7 million in your office. So why are you going to take the $4.9 million from somebody else, right? So a lot of our clients have been targets of DSOs, and I see what they're getting paid for them. And, here's my take on this. If someone came up to me and said, hey, Jeff, I want to buy your car. And let's say my car is whatever it's, worth whatever it's worth. But they want to give me 4 times the Blue Book value for my car. First time I'd go, I'm trying to be a fairly honest person. I'd say, you can get this car for this much, right? Oh, yeah, we know. It's not worth this much. Oh, yeah, we know. But I give you 4 times what it's worth. You're sure? Yeah, I'm sure. I'm going to take the money. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but I don't know. Why would I refuse the money if they know? And I've told them, look, it's not worth that much, and they know, and they can go get one for cheaper. But they really want it. Fine, let them buy it, right? That's sort of my viewpoint. If someone's going to pay you way above that 70% valuation, it's what I've told our clients, do it. Why not? But now let's march this forward the next 3, 4, 5 years, because most of these DSOs buy with the idea that the owner doctor is going to stick around for 5 years. Well, when you see these offices that are doing 6, 7, 8, 10 million a year, a lot of the reason that they do is because of the dynamic and driving force of the owner doctor. Well, 4 to 5 years from now, that owner doctor does not have to stick around. They can go move out of state if they feel like it. They're no longer tied to the business. Well, what's going to happen to the business? Well, hopefully by then, if you're private equity, you've sold that thing, so you don't have to hold on to it anymore when it eventually implodes, because that's what I believe. This is just me and my opinion. I think what we're looking at, and I'll read you my exact prediction that I gave our clients. It was, we're in the process of witnessing a DSO bubble in which many DSOs, especially those which are poorly run and connected to private equity, will implode and collapse in value due to poor management, or when the original owner doctor moves on, or the company is offloaded. Because again, remember, these private equity companies, if they own the DSO, want to sell the DSO within 5 to 7 years, because then they've recouped their investment. I predict this will happen over the next 5 to 12 years. I know that's a pretty big window, but I've already seen it at a very small level, where I've seen clients who have sold to DSOs and then bought back 5, 6 years later their own practices at 30 cents on the dollar. Imagine that for a second. Could you imagine that? Let's say you had 3 offices and you sold them for, $10 million. And then 6 years later, you're buying those offices back for 2 or 3 million. Okay. I'm seeing that happen. Well, what do you think is going to happen over the next 5 to 12 years, especially as these owner doctors, these dynamic owner doctors who have built these huge offices move on? The way I have our clients looking at it is, well, we've already got the opportunity that's going to be created by these retiring doctors who won't be DSO targets, that are going to be looking to do something with their practices, either sell the practice or sell the charts. You have those practices you could be buying and taking advantage of that opportunity. Well, in 5 to 12 years, as these DSOs, especially the ones that are not well run, start to implode, you can buy those too. Maybe even your own office if you sold it at some point. It's just more opportunity for the stable practice, stable, privately practicing dentist. So what this leaves us with is this, for this objective, DSOs are not your competition. If you're bidding against a DSO for a practice, I would tell you stop. You can find a smaller office that you can scale. And if you don't know how to scale, which MGE clients do, you should absolutely know how to scale. You know how to be a dentist. You should know how to run a business. Okay. 1 in 4 younger dentists are working for DSOs. There's always going to be a place for private practices in the United States, and there are tons of more opportunities again with these non-DSO practices that you could take advantage of. And I think in the future, and this is sort of what we've kind of challenged MGE clients to, which is done properly, expansion into multiple practices by a private practicing dentist, right? Especially in the MGE client base, could actually help to revitalize and salvage the private practice of dentistry, because you could have a couple things going. Number one, a private equity run DSO versus a dentist run DSO has two different purposes. If I'm private equity, I need to get my money out. If I'm a dentist run DSO and I'm very hands-on and I'm making sure clinical care and quality is high, I want good care to happen, and I'm planning on holding this for the long haul. Whereas if I'm a DSO, or I'm a private equity DSO, I just want my money. Two different purposes. So if let's say that's you. You've got 4 or 5, 6, 12 offices, and you're keeping an eye on the clinical and you're making sure everything's good. Well, you're going to be bringing younger doctors into that environment that you can mentor, and, possibly even these are future business partners. You can actually provide that dream of at least partial practice ownership that they probably had when they first entered dental school that they would not have in a corporate environment, and preserve dentistry the way that dentistry should be being practiced. All right. So that leads us to, we've got that challenge of the DSOs out of the way. What is some of the other challenges that you're going to be facing, especially if you're going to do this multiple practice model or just expand your current practice, your private practice, over the next however many years? Let's look at the labor market for a second. Because what we're hearing is that unemployment is still low, it's hard to find employees, and so on. That is half true. I will agree that it's difficult to find hygienists and highly skilled dental assistants, and there's a reason for that. I do not agree that it is difficult to find administrative staff, because despite what the unemployment numbers say, there's another number I'm going to point your attention to. So I'm going to throw 3 graphs at you if you have access to the slideshow. If you don't, I'm just going to tell you what they say. The first one is the U.S. unemployment rate. It's at 3.8% right now. That's lower than it was before 2020. This is the percentage of the working populace who's unemployed. We then have the number of job openings in the United States, meaning available jobs. That number has been going down for the last year or so, but it's still higher than it was prior to 2020. So there are lots of job openings. And then we have number of unemployed people per job opening. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you might remember a couple of years back, we had 2 jobs for every 1 person in the U.S. We're at about 0.7 jobs for every 1 person, 0.7 people for every job, meaning there are more jobs than people right now. But this is where it gets interesting. This is a number that you don't see when you're seeing these unemployment numbers being touted and championed. It has to do with full-time versus part-time employment. And these are 2 graphs that we made. And if you have a chance, I would definitely recommend that you download these. These are graphs number 15 and 16. But I'm going to tell you what they say. Full-time versus part-time employment. In the last year, since March of 2023, there has been a net loss of 1.3 million full-time jobs in the U.S. from March of 23 to March of 24, meaning we have 1.3 million less full-time employees than we had a year ago. Now remember, when you're counting unemployment, it's do you have a job? If you have a job, you're not unemployed. And a job can be more than 1 hour a week of employment, folks. Okay? So when you see that number, it's both full-time and part-time, that 3.8%. But what's happening is the number of full-time workers has dropped by 1.3 million. Okay? What about part-time workers? There's been a net gain of almost 1.9 million part-time jobs from March of 23 to March of 24. So we've lost 1.35 million full-time jobs, but we've gained almost 1.9 million part-time jobs. Then we have one last graph. This is graph number 16. This is multiple job holders. These are people who hold 1 full-time and 1 part-time job. That is highest it's been since, at least what I have on this graph here that I downloaded from the Federal Reserve, is over 10 years. So we have people holding 2 jobs is higher than it's been in over 10 years. And we have a considerable number of full-time job losses and part-time job gains. So what does this tell me? It tells me that people need to work. People have more than 1 job. And by definition, a full-time job is over 35 hours a week. A part-time job is 1 to 34 hours per week. You have more multiple job holders than you've ever had. So people are looking for work. People need work. So it tells you a couple things. If you're offering a good job and you can pay a competitive rate, you should not have, especially for administrative staff, a difficult time finding employees. This is further backed up by some information from the National Federation of Independent Business. I'm not going to get into all the graphs, but the average change in workers, the inability to fill jobs or plans to hire has all been going down over the last year. You have less and less small businesses planning to hire right now. All right. And a lot of what's being cited is inflation, which I'll get into here in a little bit. So if you're looking for a new front desk person, maybe they have dental, maybe they don't have dental experience, or a treatment coordinator or a scheduler, someone that you can train. If you have training mechanisms now are critical in this day and age. If you have those things, you should not have a difficult time filling administrative positions or positions that don't require experience. Maybe you can bring in a dental assistant and train them as a floater and move them up, especially if they have the aptitude for it, and turn them into a good assistant. But let's talk about hygienists and assistants for a second. So I'll start off with a quote from, this was a collaborative, I can't say that word, collaborative study from the American Dental Association Health Policy Institute, the ADHA, the American the American Dental Assistants Association. This was a collaborative study in 2022. And I pulled one quote from it, which might be a bit shocking. It says this: approximately 1/3 of the dental assistant, 33.7%, and dental hygienist, 31.4%, workforce indicate they expect to retire in 5 years or less. So 1/3 of assistants and almost 1/3 of hygienists are planning on retiring in the next 5 years, and it might be mildly scary. So if we look at these numbers right now, there's several different sources that cite a different number, but I'll give you the most recent number I have from 2022 or 3 for dental hygienists. And I'm focusing on hygienists because usually, and this is not in any way to degrade assistants or whatever, it's generally, other than an EFTA, it's a little easier usually to find an assistant, not that it's easy, than it is to find a hygienist. Okay. So I'm focusing on hygienists specifically because also you always need a license to be a hygienist. You don't always have to have a license to be an assistant, depending on where you practice. The dental hygiene workforce last year was about 220,000, roughly 220,000. So we got 203,000 dentists and 220,000 hygienists. I think there are not enough hygienists. I think they're not. And on average, in every school year or period, the number of hygienists in school since 2018 has only bumped up by 1.7%. So it's not like, to a degree, what's happening is it looks like we're manufacturing a hygienist shortage. I don't particularly understand it because it's not a doctorate degree. It's something that can be achieved relatively quickly. Again, it's urgently important. It's a provider in a dental practice. I don't know why we're not making more. It makes no sense to me. I mentioned to our clients, maybe they want to get together, a few of them, and start a hygiene school. If you're listening and you've ever had that thought, give us a call. We'd love to help. I do think that there need to be more hygiene schools, especially because for a general dentist, what we would normally recommend is a ratio of 1 to 1.5 hygienists. So if you have a doctor in a practice, say you have 4-day-a-week general dentist, you want at least 6 days of hygiene. You don't want less because then there's usually not enough traffic to keep the doctor owner busy. And then the doctor becomes too reliant on new patients. Not that they shouldn't want new patients, but they become too reliant on new patients. You don't really want more because when you start having 2+ hygienists for one practicing doctor, it actually hampers the doctor's ability to be productive and have time to sell. That sweet spot is 1 to 1.5. This isn't a law or a rule. It's what we've observed to be most successful. By that basic concept, you would expect if I have 100 dentists, I have 150 hygienists, ideally, and we're nowhere near that right now. So it is something that has to improve. So what does this tell us from a data point perspective? Number one, the labor market has eased up a bit, especially for administrative staff. It should be easier. Number two, small businesses, according to the National Federation of Independent Business, are not hiring or putting as much hiring pressure as they had out maybe 2 years ago. And point number three, hygienists, especially for technical staff and to a lesser degree assistants, may be in shorter supply. In my opinion, this is manufactured, right? So it's something that you want to keep an eye on. All right. So that's one of our challenges with the labor market. It's more with technical staff as opposed to, especially because if you're a general dentist, you should be building your hygiene department. But with relation to administrative staff, it should not be a big problem. Let's take a look at the next area, which is general economics, inflation, fees, and things of that nature. We'll start with our inflation numbers. Now, I can talk to you about these. These are easy to talk about on the podcast, but I also have a graph if you want to check it out. It's slide number 18. And this is the inflation or CPI percentage, consumer price index percentage growth or decrease since the year 2003 through 2024. And on this graph, I've marked where 2% is because generally 2% is the target inflationary rate on a year-over-year basis that the Federal Reserve, our national bank, attempts to hit or maintain. If you've been upset about interest rates, generally interest rates don't start going down till the inflationary target is met. I'm not going to get into a whole thing on this because you'll probably, if you haven't clicked off already, you'll definitely click off then. But if inflation is running a bit wild, normally the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates in an attempt to stop lending and spending so that inflation will go down, for simplest way of explaining it. But you'll see 2% on this graph, and you'll see that since 2021-ish to 2022, it's been way above that. And specifically, it's the year-over-year figure, meaning if something, this is the month of May of 2024. So if something cost me $1 in May of 2023 and inflation is 2%, this month from a year ago, then it would cost me $1.02. That's where the Federal Reserve wants it to be. It has been higher than that, which is why you've seen the resultant change. Interest rates have gone up and have stayed up. All right. So that brings us to the next thing. And I also have a slide for this. This is 19 if you want to look at it. And it has to do with base inflation. So since March of 2020, inflation has increased year over year. Remember this year over year concept, right? And then I want to translate this into real numbers for you. So in March of 2021, it was up 2.6% from March of 2020. In March of 2022, it was up 8.5% from March of 2021. In March of 2023, it was up 5% from March of 2022. And in March of 2024, it was up 3.5% from March of 2023. Okay. Now the problem is, and again, I'm not taking a political position on this, folks. We are apolitical and areligious here. I just believe in people being able to work and, engage in commerce and do a good job, whatever, right? But let's just look at something for a second. So if I'm gaining weight, let's say I'm gaining weight and I don't want to gain weight, and I gained 10% of my body weight in a year. So let's say I weighed 160 pounds and I gained 10%. That means I weigh 176 pounds a year later. All right. Another year goes by and I've only gained 5% of my body weight. Oh, okay. Well, that sounds better than 10%, doesn't it? But I've gained 5% of 176 pounds. Remember? Because I didn't go back to 160 pounds all of a sudden. So what's 5% of 176 pounds? It's 8.8 pounds. You like how I paused it there to do my math? Because I was just throwing this out there. So follow this. I now weigh 8.8 pounds more. I weigh 184.8 pounds. So 2 years ago, I weighed 160. A year went by. I gained 10% of my body weight. So now I weigh 176. Then another year goes by and I've only gained 5%, which was 8.8 pounds. But I still weigh now 184.8 pounds. I weigh way more than I weighed a year ago and way more than much more than I weighed 2 years ago. So the point being is inflation compounds. It's not like it just goes away. Just because the number you hear is lower doesn't mean it's going backwards. You're not losing weight, okay? So how does this translate based with these numbers I gave you a minute ago with this, 2.6 and 8.5%? Well, what cost you $1 in March of 2020 costs you $1.03 in 2021, $1.11 in 2022, $1.17 in 2023, and $1.21 in 2024. So all in all, we've had a 21% overall increase in prices. Now, I mentioned this a few weeks ago in an episode, and somebody commented, 21%, what do you think it's been? That's way too low. And I agree, in certain categories, it is higher than 21%. And look, I got to go with the government numbers, folks. I do think they're cooked to a degree. I think it's a lot higher. Just for my own edification, Because, people are telling me food prices are only up by, I think that the current metric on food prices is they're up by 26%. I'm like, gosh, it has to be higher than that. So I went and grabbed the Publix circular. In Florida, Publix, a big supermarket, and they do like a weekly coupon book. So I found an old coupon book online from 2019, December of 2019, right? I print this off, and then I found a coupon book from that week. This was a few weeks ago, from whatever, April of 2024, whatever week it was. They do it weekly. And I compare the two, and I looked specifically for identical items and what their full price and their special price was, because that's what this circular does. The average increase I saw, things like Michelob Ultra and this and that, whatever, the average increase was 35 to 40%. That's what I saw in food prices. So I think it is higher. These are the numbers we're getting. It is what it is. So inflation compounds. So now, let's play this forward to an employee for a second. So let's say in March of 2020, you had a schedule coordinator or a receptionist. You were paying $18 an hour. Well, just to have them keep pace with inflation based on the government numbers, it's probably higher. Okay. But again, I got to go with the numbers I got, folks. Just to have them keep pace with inflation, they'd need to make $21.79 an hour in March of 2024. So this person you were paying $18 now needs to make $21.79, almost $22 an hour just to keep pace. And let's say you said, okay, I'm going to pay them in line with inflation. That would be an increase in your overhead of $658 a month or $7,800, almost $7,900 a year in your practice. Okay. So your costs are going up. I also represented that, by the way. That's slide number 21 if you want to look at that. I have another slide which I'll read you some of the highlights from, called slide number 22. I hope this is going okay with the slides and the numbers. I'm trying to focus on the big points. Inflation by category is different. So certain things have gone up a lot more than others. For instance, gas is up by 52% since March of 2020. So March of 2020 to now, gas is up by 52%. Electricity is up by 31%. We have our base number of 21%, right? That's the average, because that's what this consumer price index is. It's an average of all prices. Shelter's up by 23%, but apparel is only up by 8%. So you can get those, Golden Goose sneakers you've been looking for, those Saint Laurent sneakers if you really want them. And medical care services, hello, look in the mirror, are only up by 9% on average, the average being 21. But a lot of the more painful categories, food, gas, electricity, shelter, which we need all of those things. I don't necessarily have to go buy apparel to live, but I need clothes, but I don't have to buy new ones, are all up well in excess of 21%. So you start to see this doesn't just affect you. It's been affecting you and your overhead and your costs. And to that end, I showed this as a graph in the conference, but from 2019 to 2022, and this is from the ADA Health Policy Institute. They took a look at dental practice owners' net income, general dentists, not specialists. The net income of a doctor in 2019 was $186,620 a year. This was the average net income. The average net income in 2022 was $186,780. It's up by $160 from 2019 to 2022. Well, why is that? For the most part, it's because costs. Most general dentists, especially if they're in private practice, are being choked out by, rising costs, whether they're employee costs or insurance costs, for healthcare for your employees, lab, supplies, just the cost of doing business is going up. And, that's a problem. So you have to be able to respond to this, which brings us to this next point. You have to be able to affect your fees. One of the points of agility within a small business that you have to have control over in order to be agile, to respond to market forces, you have to be able to raise your fees. If you can't raise your fees, you're sunk. So there's a couple of problems here, and I've been beating the drum for this. I've probably beaten the drum skin into oblivion over the last 4 years. Number one is just your fees in general. You have a basic fee schedule. Most doctors' fee schedules, when we meet them for the first time as a client, are usually not even in the 40th percentile of what fees should be in their area. And what these percentiles mean if you buy something like the Wasserman Guide, I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. It gives you the zip code you're in, you take the zip code you're in and the CDT codes. It'll give you what the various, the 30th, 40th, 50th percentile for that code in your zip code is. So let's say, for example, we're taking the code like 2740, a crown, and they say the 40th percentile fee is $1,100. What that means is that 40% of the doctors in your zip code charge the same or less than that, and 60% charge more. So we normally advise clients to be in the 60th percentile or maybe a little more when they're setting their full fee. What tends to happen to a dentist, you buy your practice, you start your practice, you set your fees based on whatever way you did it. It might be based on what other people were charging or what the doctor you bought the practice from was charging. And then you either do or do not adjust your fees as time goes on. Very few doctors actually keep track with inflation. So by the time they show up here 8 to 10 years after they've bought or started their practice, their fees are in the 40th or they're not even on the chart. They're so low. So there's a good chance that your overall fees are way too low. So one of the things you should do or should have done and do now if you haven't done so already is affect your fees, change your fees so that they're actually comparable with inflation. Again, if you want to check it out, I'll leave the Wasserman Guide, a link to it. It's my favorite tool to use. I don't have a financial relationship with these folks, but their guide is excellent. It's very detailed. I'd recommend buying the developer version. It's about $600, but it's an updatable version you can use every year, and you can download the fee schedule. It's the other one's not very downloadable, or I had problems with it. So you can also talk to the Wasserman folks and see what's best for you. So now you have to raise your fees, but if you are in network, you can't raise your fees. So if I have 80% of my practice in network and I'm writing off, the average write-off I've seen is generally for diagnostic and preventive procedures, it's about 50%. For basic and major, it's closer to 40. So if I'm writing off 40 to 45, again, based upon the blend of procedures in my practice, of my fees, especially in an inflationary environment, I'm just going to get choked out. This is a dangerous way to do business. It just does not work long term. And I've talked about this probably to the point of, being nauseating, especially over the last few months. And I'm doing it as an alarm bell, folks, because if you cannot affect your fees, if you are in network and there's just nothing you can do about your fees and costs are going up around you, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to see over a 4-year period, your net profit go up by $160, like I just read you. Okay. You're not going to be able to keep up with inflating salaries in your area, and you may lose staff. You're not going to be able to use the lab you necessarily want to use, and it's definitely going to torpedo your financial future and your financial goals if you're not in a position where you can affect your fees. So this is where, again, I've been saying it to our clients for years. I just said it with a lot more intensity at this last conference. People have to get out of network. You need to get out of network. We just did episodes on this over the last few weeks, especially where I had Sabri on a few weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago or last week, I forget. I think it was 2 weeks ago, where she actually went over the steps that we go through with every client to get out of network. Now, she did mention something intriguing in that episode, which I thought was kind of interesting, which was she's had a few clients get out. And because the fee that most people, let's say you drop, and she said you take 3 boxes, right? You have the plans that you could just drop tomorrow. There are 20 people in it. And you've got a 60% write-off. You could drop the plan and you wouldn't even think twice about it. Just get rid of those. Then you have bucket number 2, which is the bulk of your plans. And bucket number 3 is Delta, which is a whole other thing. Okay. But you could take these plans that you're in and charge whatever the out of network fee is for hygiene and not raise those fees, just raise the basic and major fees, which is what she was suggesting some clients did. And obviously they had to check and see if it worked in their state legally and otherwise. And they dropped the network plan. And for most patients, it didn't bother them at all, because the things that people are going to notice are when preventive and diagnostic fees go up. Okay, because they notice that they have a copay now with their cleaning, whereas it used to be covered at 100%. They don't care so much that they're paying an extra couple dollars or an extra $50 for the filling they got done, but they sure care if they're paying an extra $30 for the cleaning for their kids. So She recommended that. I thought that was actually a really smart idea. And when you do that model, I actually did two things at our conference. We actually had a client doing it, and I showed the P&L. It was for a satellite practice that were actually doing real well. They were netting like 25% almost, and they weren't in the practice. But it actually works, and it keeps your net in a very manageable range, but it also puts you in a position where you can actually affect your fees. I probably will have an episode coming up on this where I really dive into this a little bit more so you guys can think with this. But the thing I liked about it is for some people that are so into plans and so buried in plans and they're worried about how to get out, this sort of gives them a route out. And I can't tell you with enough intensity, you need to get out of these plans. And to that end, we are still offering our roadmap to a fee-for-service practice consultation. If you want to check it out, I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. You can talk to one of our practice management specialists, and they can walk you through for your individual situation what it would take to get out of network. This is something you really need to be thinking about right now because you don't want to be in network over the next 3 to 5 years. It's just a bad idea, in my opinion. All right, so what are our data points here? Specifically, inflation's been very high. And if you can't affect your costs and fees remaining in a low or in-network plan in the face of an inflationary wave, you're destroying your ability to stay competitive. So to ensure your success, you have to have the ability to affect your fees as quickly as possible. So you can kind of see the big picture, right? What we've got right now is prevailing industry conditions point to a once-in-a-career growth opportunity with these practices that should be coming on the market over the next 5 to 10 years, all right? And DSOs are really not your competition for these practices. You do need to know how to scale a business in order to make these practices work for you because you don't want to have it where you can't scale your current office and you're buying up some of these offices. It also gives you an opportunity to keep the ownership of dentistry in private dentistry's hands, which is sort of near and dear to my heart. Some of the challenges that you're facing in the labor market have to do more with hygienists and dental assistants, not so much with administrative staff anymore. But to that end, the overall challenge you might be facing has to do with inflation and economics. And if you're in a position where you can't affect your fees, that will affect your ability to attract high-end talent. So what is the big picture that we're recommending to our clients right now? And I kept it very general because there's a lot of specific things that we do with an individual client. Well, obviously, the most important thing was make sure that their primary practice is stable and expanding and doing well, so it is a launch pad to expand out or up into the industry. But now, what would that look like? What are some important things you'd want to focus on now? Well, the first thing I would take a look at is volume. This is a time where you want to take your new patient marketing and your hygiene, building your hygiene department very seriously. We've had several episodes where we've talked about how the hygiene department not getting the attention that it requires and retention not getting the attention that it requires puts a practice into a situation where they're just living off their new patients, which is a terrible idea. But you want to do both. Number one, I would be pushing a ton of new patients into your practice. If you don't know, if you've never been to MGE before, you're not a client, you can check out the MGE New Patient Workshop. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. I would also advise that you really take getting your hygiene together very seriously. There's a number of ways you can do that. We've done a couple episodes on that, but keep in mind, if you were just getting 25 new patients per month, 300 new patients per year, after 10 years, you should have 12 days of hygiene in your practice a week. Okay, that would be 3 full-time hygienists if you were working 4 days a week. If that's not you, if you've only got 3 or 4 days of hygiene, that means the patients are coming in the front door and leaving out the back, and it's a huge waste factor. But that was the first thing, is we want our clients to take that very seriously. The next thing is now it's, as a priority, get out of network. I have all of our clients on the MGE Power Program working with their Power Client Manager to get out of network as quickly as possible. Next thing is, a lot of our clients do a lot of advanced work, FMR, all on 4s, all on X's, things like this. And, what I've seen in certain cases, not necessarily in our client base, I've seen it with newer clients, is people will know how to do these procedures, which I think is incredible. I mean, what can be done in dentistry now versus, 20 years ago is amazing, right? Or heck, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But you don't want to live off of big cases. I've seen this happen in offices where they're focused on that $27,000 case, yet they're not closing those $3,000 and $5,000 cases. It's all dentistry and it's all needed. So to keep it simple, couple things. One, you should know how to do all of these advanced cases. I mean, to that end, we actually have a sister organization called DDS Clinical. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. A lot of links this week where we have a whole course on FMR and a course on, basic implants, advanced implant placement, things like this. So you should know how to do these big cases, but you should have a profitable practice without any big cases. Does that make sense? So without doing a big case, my practice does $250 a month. You add the big cases on, now I'm doing $400 or $500 a month. Maybe these are big numbers, okay? I'm just throwing this out there. But we're very profitable at $250 a month. Like I could be profitable without the big cases. So when I put the big cases on top of that, we're super profitable. Plus it allows me to do more for my patients at that point. But you've got enough new patient and hygiene flow and doing just, bread and butter, nuts and bolts dentistry to have a profitable practice, and you're throwing the big cases on top of that. Next area I directed our clients' attention to was staff training, and there's two aspects to staff training. There's something happening in the employment market, and I've talked about this or alluded to it on prior episodes. I think this is just part of the natural progression of aging, the sort of get out of my yard as you age thing. Hey, kids, get out of my yard. We look at younger people coming in and we go, oh, God, these kids today, they're this, they're that. They're not like when I came and had to go to work and had to walk uphill both ways or whatever, right? What's actually happening to a degree is the people who are entering the job market now, the younger people, have not necessarily been trained on what it takes to work in a professional environment. It's not that they're not willing to learn. It's not that they're bad. It's not that they're not smart. They've just not been equipped with the proper skills. Now, for better or for worse, school, even just basic elementary, middle, and high school, gave you basic skills. And the jobs you would have when you were in high school gave you the basic skills you would need to operate in a professional environment. Not all of them, but some of the basic ones. Here's the customer. I call the customer Mr. or Ms. I don't call them dude. I don't call them bruh, right? Or Bill, especially if it's an elderly gentleman and I'm 17 years old, right? You see what I'm saying? The things, or how to write a business letter I learned in the third grade, right? Things of that nature, kids are not necessarily walking in equipped with now. They just aren't taught these things. A lot of people that you hire who are under 25 have never actually written a letter. It's only been an email or a text. So you have to have some training mechanisms in place to equip the newer people you have coming into your working environment to be able to do these things. And to a degree, and this is completely anecdotal here, folks. I'm not a dentist, so I can't really comment on this. I have heard from longer-term practicing dentists that have hired younger doctors that have graduated maybe in the last 2-3 years in certain instances where they've run into, more than I guess in the past, okay, a lack of confidence in doing certain procedures, but basic procedures like posting cores and things like this. Maybe they didn't have a lot of experience with it, especially post-2020 in dental school. So it's not a matter of more CE for these kids. It's a matter of education or mentorship. So you have to almost, for lack of a better word, have an undercut to your current staff training mechanisms and methodologies, even for provider types in your practice, to bring them up to the level that you would expect maybe somebody would have walked in with 5, 10, 15 years ago. And that's fine. It's just what we're dealing with. Once you train them on those basic things, now you can do what you always did. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and this is something specifically I directed at our clients, is if you're looking at taking advantage of this additional location concept, right? You want to get all these additional locations. The thing that makes these additional location works is personnel. You have to have the right personnel in these practices. And I'm going to dedicate a whole episode to this because I think this is worthwhile. But the bottom line I'll tell you is this, is what we found, obviously you have to have a good doctor in these practices, a doctor who does good work. They don't have to be able to do everything. Because it might be, you have your main office and you do the really heavy-duty implant and FMR cases or all-on-X cases, and maybe in your satellite office, which is far enough away to where you're not sharing patients, but not so far that someone might not drive over to the main office for a very involved procedure. Maybe they do the basic procedures in that satellite office, but then if a person needs the, implants or something that they don't do in that satellite office, you might go there a morning a week or something like this and go place 10 implants in a day. You see, it might be something fun to do. The other thing with the satellite office is you don't want to have it where it requires you as the owner doctor for it to survive. It should survive on its own with these additional locations. Obviously, the idea is not that we butter you all over the universe. But part of the big picture is what makes this work is personnel. You got to have a good doctor. And what's critical is having good management in that practice, especially with a satellite office. So if you take an MGE client, they're normally training themselves as an executive, the doctor, but then they also train a manager. All right. And that manager training is just as long as the doctor's executive training. And look, this may make some people tune out. If you haven't already tuned out, I think I'm clocking in well over an hour now. But, the training involved in the MGE Power Program is roughly 76 days. It's 600 hours of training. Click. But the education is definitely well worth it as far as with the results that you can produce. And you probably know a power client or know somebody who's done the program and you know what I'm talking about. So you've got your doctor and your manager. And let's say you have office number 1 and you see this office across town that you want to buy. Well, ideally, you'd want someone sort of like your manager that you could stick into that office with a good doctor that could make that office more productive. Well, you don't want to take your manager out because your manager is the one who's running your practice. So what we recommend for MGE clients that are doing this is to have a couple of manager trainees in training at all times. Like we have clients who have 6, 10 people through these things and they have several offices where they have 2 or 3 managers that they've been training or have been trained that are sort of in reserve from when they purchase that next practice. That's a critical hire and it's a lot easier when you have somebody already there that you can just shift over to that other office. And here's the truth. If you've got a couple of trained manager types in your practice is only going to be more productive anyway. So it really ends up panning out in the long term. And not only will you have the ability to get these additional locations, but you'll also have continued growth with the practice that you're in. So I know that was I think it's the longest episode I've ever done, but that is more or less the state of what is going on in the profession. I do have the charts downloads if you want to download these to sort of follow along with, or maybe refer to some of the stuff I was referring to in the episode. I also have all the other links I talked about for the new patient workshop, the roadmap to a fee-for-service practice, and so on. But I'll sum up with this. You are, as I said, and I hate to use the word literally because it's so overused, but it's the best word I can think of. You're literally at a once-in-a-lifetime fork in the road. You have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as a dentist right now in the United States over the next 5 to 10 years to really build your empire. MGE clients are taking advantage of it. It's not difficult. It's actually easier, or it's harder not to do it. I know this sounds kind of silly. And if you're one of those folks who wants to take advantage of this, I would definitely recommend that you do. Definitely, you have to know how to scale a business. If you want help with this, that's what we're here for. You can reach us at 800-640-1140 or find us online at mgeonline.com. But there you have it. That's sort of a nutshell of what I covered. I hope this helps. I hope this gives you a better picture as to what's happening. There is a lot of potential opportunity out there for you. I do hope you take advantage of it, and I do hope you find the success that you're looking for. Folks, have a great week, and I'll see you at the next episode.